And we're joined by Mark Holland from the Urban Development Institute. Your presentation to council gave a great description of why it is that it's so unaffordable, a house these days, but not a whole lot in there that members of a city council can control. Things like interest rates and building costs. A lot of it's out of their hands, isn't it?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's part of why we did the presentation today, was to point out that the discussion on the affordability of new housing is reaching a deeply fragile point right now, because there's basically 5 types of costs that we deal with: cost of land, the cost of building materials, the cost of all the people who are involved, we call those soft costs, the cost of money, and finally the cost of municipal approvals. There's only 2 of those really that a local government has much control over, and the first one is the cost of land, and the last one is the cost of applications and approvals and the time it takes, and development cost charges and things that they apply to a project. Those are really the only 2 that a local government has control over, and all the rest of them, we all have to just deal with those costs as they come up. And the message today was these other ones are essentially getting to a point now where it's putting many projects on hold. When we need more housing rather than less, the banks won't even lend us money to do a lot of these housing projects because there's not enough profit margin. The costs are too high.
So you listed off a few large projects that have been paused. Is there any blame on council for the reason behind those projects stopping?
I wouldn't level blame at council on those. There's many factors that come into these projects. In terms of Kelowna going forward, because as we said in the presentation, the cost of money has been a really key issue, the interest rates. We all feel it. And in real estate development, we get hit several times very hard by interest rates. First off, the way we pay for building a building is almost 100% borrowed money. We may buy the land and put in some of our own money to a certain point, but the way the numbers work, it's almost the cost that pays for the building of a building is almost 100% borrowed money. That means if the interest rate goes up, it really hits the cost of actually building that building. So this becomes an issue then that council just needs to grapple with in these, and the historical rates of interest have been just so low that they're now coming back to normal. So this 5% to 7% range for mortgages, that has historically been normal.
Right.
So that's the challenge that we face now. So things that councillors can do, there'll be an official community plan update that's mandated by the government, the provincial government, coming up with about 20 years of housing supply required. And they're going to be offering low interest loans to municipalities to put in infrastructure. The number one thing a municipality can do is to make sure that their official community plan and the zoning accommodates many decades of growth down the line, and they need to have good conversations with the community about how communities will change. Because if someone who's trying to build housing has to compete with someone else who's building housing for the only few sites that are available, they will get into a bidding war, or they'll simply leave the neighborhood and the community.
Do you get the feeling that this council has been on the right track on this topic?
I would say that the Kelowna Council and staff are generally considered around BC as definitely in the leader pack of what to do. Working with the planning department here in our industry is generally considered to be one of the best planning departments in the province to work with. But that is because they've made a lot of changes. And the most important thing they've done is not look at developers as evil, as problematic, but actually sit down and it's because many of them have worked with home builders and roll up their sleeves and go, okay, what do we need to do? Because it's not about just opening the doors and letting developers do anything they want. That's not what anybody is happening. This is a negotiation around how we build a community. It's just that the developers take all the risk and they have to deal with all these other costs. So the planning approvals process, it's not perfect, none of them are, and it's always a bit contentious because somebody wants to do something and maybe it's not appropriate to be done, but there's a due process. So it's always a little bit contentious. But I would say that certainly working with staff here generally is considered one of the best cities in the province to work with.
Real focus is on infill in Kelowna. Is that the right way to sort of build our way out of this problem? Through infill?
It's a great question you ask. Infill is fundamental, and by infill we mean essentially building new homes in and amongst existing homes, right, and even knocking down existing homes to put up larger buildings. It's certainly the favored approach because the alternative is generally widely considered sprawl. Now, it doesn't have to be sprawl, but it means we're now going to move out either into the hillsides, the forests, the farmland, and build there instead.
Right. Which is what we're sort of avoiding right now.
Right. The question, though, is how long can that go on for until we begin to really run out of land? And the bigger the building you build, the more expensive it is to build that building. So concrete tower is the most expensive form of housing we can build. It can easily be 30 to 50% more per square foot than a wood building.
So are we already reaching that constraint? Do we need to rethink that?
I don't think
already?
you're there yet, but the change to existing neighborhoods is pretty significant. And the politics of this is what council has to deal with. So the staff process is excellent. We, as we noted in our presentation, we have a lot of compassion. We're grateful that people are willing to be councillors because it's not an easy job and they don't get paid much. And the neighbors don't want change because we live in the neighborhoods. We all live in the neighborhoods we live in because we like them. And when a 6-story or 26-story building is going to be put in across the street, it's like, that's not the neighborhood I want to live in. So it's understandable people will get quite political about this. And that's the challenge of infill. It's not just a technical thing, it's a political thing.
Right. And bottom line, developers are not evil?
We don't think of bakers as evil because they make sugary donuts. We don't think of so many people like that.
Yeah.
For some reason, folks, because it's how much they change neighborhoods, people feel uneasy around developers because they see them coming in and changing everything around them. Everyone thinks developers make off like bandits and make loads of money. I can tell you so many of them go bankrupt all the time, and the profit margins are not what people think. So usually you have, for instance, in a concrete tower, a typical concrete tower can cost as much as $100 million easily. 30% of that has to be the developer's savings or their friend's savings. So you can't even begin to build that housing unless you have 30 million. So most developers actually started fairly wealthy. Yeah. So they're not necessarily making off like bandits anywhere like this at all. And the amount of risk they take on every project, most developers put their own family home up. So you can imagine that every project you went out, if it went bad, you and your partner and your kids had to go find a rental building somewhere because you're bankrupt. So they take a lot of risk, and they're deeply committed to their communities, and that's why they're willing to take the risk. But no, they're not making off like bandits at this at all. It's a very difficult field.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for this.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Kelowna Now.